Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Bizarro Gospel Hour. I'm your host, Bishop Pete. And last time, I really got rolling on the general idea that Donald Trump is Satan, or that Satan at this point is inhabiting the body of Donald Trump. And I want to elaborate more on that and a little bit more on the relationship of Satan to his demons and the relationship of Satan and his demons to the rest of humanity, in particular the basket of deplorables who voted for him the last time. So, as preparation for that, I was doing a little bit of reading. Again, not so much in the Bible as in Paradise Lost by John Milton, who I think tells it pretty much the way the Bible and the other ancient scriptures do, about how the whole thing came to be. And there was a battle in heaven. Satan, Lucifer, one of the really major angels, decided to rebel against God and fought a battle. And St. Michael, the archangel, God's sort of number one general, finally kicked his ass and threw him out. But along with that, he took about a third of all the angels in heaven. So that's a whole lot of demons that Satan has working for him now. And in Paradise Lost, and I didn't reread the whole damn thing. I mean, I think I might have had to read it back when I was an undergraduate, but I did read the first few hundred lines and then a kind of a summary of the rest of it. Very early on, Milton's talking about, Satan's battle, dubious battle on the plains of heaven, and where he decides that, it's better to reign in hell than to serve in heaven and all that kind of stuff. And there's some, interaction going on between Satan and a couple of his major demons, his archdemons, you might say. Beelzebub is one, and Leviathan, and there's a few others out there. But and it seems to me, and I talked about this last time, it seems to me that the demons in particular are a bit rueful, if you will, about having had this battle with God and having been thrown out of heaven forever and ever in the first place. But Satan tries to sort of buck them up. Well, look at all the fun we can have doing evil, with mankind and everything. This is going to be a lot of fun. Kind of ignoring for the moment the fact that it is written that eventually you're going to be condemned to eternal damnation and hellfire. Which brings us back to another point I made last time, and that is that stupidity and evil really go hand in hand. In case you're thinking to yourself, well, Donald Trump is too big of a dumbass to really be satanic. Don't forget, Satan made the stupidest move in the history of the universe when he decided to rebel against God, knowing what the consequences would be. So stupidity and all that are certainly part and parcel of what it means to be the devil, which means that the devil doesn't always quite, win out in the end. And we're told, theologically speaking, that the devil isn't going to win out in the long run. Now, let's talk about the short run. Let's talk about Donald Trump, aka Satan, and what he's doing now. And back up just a tiny bit. I believe, again, I have no rational basis for believing this, but based on the Holy Scriptures, I have an intuitive feeling that what Satan does, and again, looking at, recent history, and by recent I mean, say, over the past 100 years or so, what I think Satan does is decides to occupy certain human beings, human bodies, for his purposes. Hitler always comes to mind, and that's as good a jumping off point as any, you know. I think that there was a guy named Adolf Hitler, and he was a mere mortal, and he was beginning to develop some pretty outlandish and bizarre and ideas. And I think what Satan did under those circumstances was he looked for, you know, someone who gave him something to work with in that place and time. The German people, you know, did not come from a tradition of democracy. They came from a militaristic and imperialistic tradition. They weren't used to, you know, deciding their own fate at the ballot box by any means. And they were smarting from having lost World War I and having gotten a lot of punishment as a result thereof, punishment they richly deserved, but which, you know, caused guys like Hitler to really go on the offensive to try to rearm them. And the German people were people who pretty much, you know, aside from the Jews who lived in Germany, were otherwise fairly ethnically homogeneous. I'm pointing out some differences between, say, the way the United States is now and the way Germany was back in the 20s and 30s. And they had kind of a, you know, limited experience with what you might call a parliamentary form of government, with a chancellor in the case of Germany. And so, you know, it wasn't extremely difficult. It wasn't a real big leap for Hitler to, you know, become the chancellor of Germany and at that point just say, well, you know, I'm going to ban all the other parties and I'm going to be the only one. And from now on, the German people's might and greatness and historic destiny is going to be restored. That resonated with the Germans. And what followed, you know, was, of course, you have to find a scapegoat for why things are so fucked up. And the main scapegoat was the Jewish people who lived both in Germany and in other parts of Europe. So we all know how that turned out, but it's important to remember that, you know, Hitler died eventually. And at that point, I assume that Satan left his body and either lay in wait for another body or went to another body. Who knows? I figure Satan can be in more than one body at a time. And still, you know, maybe Satan made a good choice, maybe he didn't. But while he was occupying the body of Adolf Hitler, certainly from the late 20s or early 30s on through 1945 when Hitler died, still as Hitler, aka Satan, he made a number of the human body that Satan occupied, made a number of stupid decisions. And ultimately, those decisions really were what did him and the Third Reich in, or at least they contributed to it. I think ultimately it was a matter of having to fight a war on two fronts and just being overwhelmed. You know, maybe it would have been a war of attrition that lasted a little bit longer, but had Hitler not decided to do some of the things he did, like trying to conquer the Soviet Union and all that, and some other decisions he made against the advice of his own military apparatus. Anyway, I just throw that out to show you how, in my belief, Satan can occupy the body of a person. And it brings us to, of course, Donald Trump, aka Satan. There's no doubt in my mind that at present, Satan and Donald Trump are one and the same. But the question might arise as to when Satan decided to occupy the body of Donald Trump. I do not believe, contrary to the Damien movies and all that kind of stuff, that, you know, someone is born as the child of Satan. I happen to think that Satan has the ability to occupy bodies of, well, humans as well as beasts. We see in the book of Genesis that Satan decided to show up as a snake, you know, and he could be as a beast or a dragon or whatever it is that people probably are most afraid of at any given time. I think my studied opinion and of course I have no proof of this, is that Satan decided to enter the body of Donald Trump. Maybe he'd been working up to it, but he decided to officially enter the body of Donald Trump sometime during Trump's first administration, not at the very beginning. The Trump that got elected in 2016 was no doubt a pretty bad person, a narcissist, a thoroughgoing asshole. And I think Satan saw that and said, well, this is something I can work with. Right now, this guy is just feeling his way. He doesn't know what the fuck is going on as far as how to be president or what potential power he has as a president. And he's sort of doing it, by the book, you might say, and running into obstacles all along the way. Members of his cabinet resigning because, he was such a fucking tool and, that kind of thing. And being more or less made fun of by the entire world. And at some point, Satan's, helps Trump to get a little bit more serious about things so that by the end of his first term, he's raring to go. He does the whole January 6th thing. And then in the interregnum between the first term and the second term, he's going full bore, to figure out, well, what is it that I can manipulate within the system? And just as the Germans were ripe for a guy like Hitler because of their, I'd say, inherent militarism and a romantic idealistic belief in their destiny as the Aryan people and all that kind of horse shit, the United States was ripe for Donald Trump, because of their built-in fierce racism, our built-in fierce racism caused by the institution of slavery and also our conquest of the native people who were here when Europeans first got here, and also more recently this Constitution that we have, that we sort of have been worshiping since it was written back in the 1780s. This belief that basically the Constitution is going to be a safe and reliable way to keep what we call democracy, at least democracy for a certain percentage of the people, going indefinitely. This belief that we're the greatest country on earth, and so the mechanism that Satan and Donald Trump, aka Satan, and Satan, aka Donald Trump, have chosen to be satanic is, manipulation of the Constitution. Instead of just having a bunch of people goose stepping through the streets and going Heil Hitler and all that kind of stuff, which, that kind of tickled the fancy of the average German, but it wouldn't perhaps have quite that much resonance with us. Not to say that there isn't an increase in militarism, but it's more of a kind of an early, Nazi style thugism that is going on with ICE and everything. Anyway, why not? If you've got a government that is run by these three supposedly co-equal branches, with the legislature, the branch that is supposed to really pass all the laws, and the executive branch running the military and carrying out the laws that the legislature passes, and the judiciary telling the executive and the legislature, whoa, wait a minute, you can do this, but you can't do that, based on couple hundred years of precedent. This is legal and this isn't. You take a system like that and you poke around at it and you realize the only effective enforcement mechanisms that any of these branches of government have reside, guess what, with the executive. If the Supreme Court decides to tell Donald Trump he can't do something and then wants to enforce its decision, and I don't know if that's going to happen, but if they do, guess who gets to enforce it? The Justice Department. Well, Obviously, that ain't happening, right? So, somewhere along the line, somebody, uh, you know, got informed Trump, or at least Trump's people, of the fact that, you know, other than breaking with precedent, which, is just a sort of couple hundred years worth of gentlemen's agreements, um, there is nothing to stop the executive from pretty much doing whatever the executive wants and telling the other two branches of government, fuck you if you don't like it. And of course, that's exactly what Trump, aka Satan, is doing right now. Now, getting back to theology, so I got to looking at the book of Revelation, don't you know? The revelation of Saint John the Divine, as it's called in the Western Bible, the book of the Apocalypse, as it's called by some, and in the KJV, the King James Version, the revelation of Saint John the Divine. Now, who the hell was Saint John the Divine? Well, St. John the Divine was actually the Apostle John, called St. John the Apostle, and sometimes, for purposes of revelation, St. John the Divine, which was, I think, a mistranslation from the Greek. But at any rate, that's to differentiate him from, like, St. John the Gunslinger and St. John the Shoeshine Boy and all that. So St. John the Divine, he's writing this. He's already supposedly written the Gospel of John and the three epistles of John, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John in the New Testament. And now he's writing this. He's on some island, the island of Patmos in the Aegean Sea. And he starts out talking to various churches in the, excuse me, in the Greek Isles. He's talking to his people in Asia, and by that probably means Turkey, and Ephesus, and Pergamos, and Patmos, and Sardis, various Greek places. And he's, telling them, I've seen this and I've seen that, and angels have appeared, and, this and that's going to happen, and good's going to be punished, and bad's going to be punished, and good is going to be maintained and triumph ultimately, even though there's a lot of shit that's going to happen between now and then. And he's talking probably to people who are fully expecting to be martyred, as it were, fed to the lions or something by the Romans. And then it seems like, and speaking as someone who took the occasional acid trip way, way back when, seems like at some point around chapter 4, he really starts getting off, and he starts talking about, animals with, different parts of the bodies, and, 10 horns and 7 eyes, and all kinds of uneven distribution of eyes and horns, and, horses of all different colors and all that kind of crazy stuff. And then he gets into the real heavy-duty eschatology that we talked about last time. But one of the interesting things in chapter 13, and this could almost curl your hair if you were a really, really serious adherent to this whole revelation thing. So he's talking about the beast, and the beast is like unto a leopard, and his feet are the feet of a bear, and his mouth is the mouth of a lion, and so on and so forth. So, St. John is really tripping at this point, obviously. And I saw one of its heads, as it were, wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed. And all the world wondered after the beast. Well, remember when Trump got shot in the ear and missed probably by half an inch, getting his little brain penetrated? And then, he goes on and he says, and there was given unto him, that is the dragon or the beast or whatever, a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and power was given unto him to continue 42 months. And there's a bunch of other stuff, which if you really, want to make square pegs fit into round holes and all that kind of stuff, you could say, wow, this shit is really coming true. Not just, in an abstract way, but in the way that was described, And so 42 months, that's like 6 months shy of a full term as president. So we might look to see some change of a fairly major kind taking place about halfway through year 4 of the second Trump term. Who knows? I throw that out to you. Now let's talk about the demons. As I said, Satan took a third of the angels down to hell with him to be his demons. And so, what of the demons that are currently in the government of the United States? Well, there are some personages, if you will, who are without any question demons. And I would say Stephen Miller is probably Beelzebub, who's sort of the number one demon, the archdemon of Satan. And of course, all the members of Trump's cabinet, Trump, aka Satan's cabinet, are demons. And then when you go into, the people who work at the sub-cabinet level, the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, and so on. And then when you get to the legislature, you've got certainly a number of demons, but I don't think every single senator and representative on the Republican side is a demon necessarily. I think some of them are just hapless human fuckwits who have drank the Kool-Aid, so to speak. But there are some who are most undoubtedly demons. I mean, Ted Cruz, he looks like a fucking satanic being anyway. And then, there are demons who were sent, I think, ahead of time to sort of, soften up the population, demons who started their work much earlier than when Trump inhabited the body, Satan inhabited the body of Trump, like Mitch McConnell, for example, demon all the way. Lindsey Graham, definitely a demon. John Kennedy, that senator from Louisiana, demon all the way. And quite a few other senators on the Republican side are demons, but some of them are just, maybe, I don't know. Lisa Murkowski, who always looked a little bit like a reptile anyway, I'm not sure if she was or not. And then on the House of Representatives side, there are certainly tons of demons. I mean, I talked last time on my show about Marjorie Taylor Greene, most definitely a demon. And of course, Mike Johnson, a demon. And you can say, well, some of these people are so fucking stupid, Bishop Pete. Don't forget, stupidity might have been the original sin of Satan, if you will. Doing what he did, knowing what the consequences would be, and doing it anyway. So, don't discount stupid. And, dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of members of the Republican side of the House of Representatives are demons, but hundreds of them are not. They're just human beings who have been, who are, venal people and just really unpleasant, racist people who represent unpleasant, racist people. But they're human beings. And then over on the Supreme Court, that third supposedly co-equal branch of the government, you've got Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito, who are definitely demons. And they've just been biding their fucking time, for a long, long time, waiting for their chance. Kavanaugh, the frat boy, he's a demon. Gorsuch, I'm not sure. He's probably a demon too. I don't know about Amy Barrett, if she's a demon or not. And then John Roberts, I don't know. But let's talk about those people who aren't demons, but who are human beings who have been, they're Republicans, but they're not Satan's angels. They're just human beings who have been, well, I won't say led astray necessarily, but they've gone astray. Is there any hope for them? That's a real question. And, when you look at the theology of all three of the major Western religions, Islam, Judaism, and Christianity, they do offer ways out for people who have been led astray or have gone into states of sin. But in order to do that, you really have to renounce certainly the Republican Party, and you have to go over the Democratic Party. And at some time before you die, or maybe after you die, depending on the particular theology, you have to really make an act of contrition. You have to confess your sin, and you have to be able to be willing to accept God again. Now that's Christianity. I'm not 100% sure how Islam handles it, but I think their feeling is, people, if they'll be judged by, how much they adhered to the rules of Islam while they were on earth, and they can be redeemed even if they did really, really bad things, if they did some good things as well. Maybe if they upheld the 5 pillars of Islam or something like that. And the Protestants, they're a little bit more, especially the predestinarian Protestants, are a little more hard-ass about that. But the Roman Catholic, and the Jewish version of all that is, and I suppose this only applies to Jews, everybody's going to basically make it to heaven. Some people might have to spend a year or so kind of, having a really, really good think about the bad stuff they did. And then after that, they get to go into the bosom of Abraham, But the Roman Catholic Church has probably the easiest way out for all. And that is, as long as, you make, say, as long as you get your last rites, or as long as you die in a state of grace, having confessed your sins, you're going to be okay. You're going to go to purgatory for a certain length of time. And even if for whatever reason you don't make a final confession, you only get partial absolution or something like that, you can have your friends and family sort of pray you out of purgatory, or at least shorten your stay there. And purgatory is just kind of where you go to wait until your sins are purged, however many hundreds or thousands of years that takes, so that you can finally enter into the kingdom of heaven and sit, in the glory of God. So, there's hope for people, but what they have to do is confess, and they have to get right with the program. Now, all this talk about Satan and all the damage that Satan is doing, Satan, aka Donald Trump, is doing, might seem quite discouraging, because almost every day we tune in to the news, and there's some other outrageously stupid or ambitious or just plain nasty, evil thing that Trump, aka Satan, is doing. And I don't think we've seen the half of it yet. There's going to be stuff that's going to, really make our toes curl or whatever. But, there are those of you out there who, probably quite pessimistic at this point. And that's why I've taken the time to have this little talk today, because no religion would be any good, even the religion of your old pal Bishop Pete, if it didn't offer some hope. No religion worth its salt is any good if it doesn't offer, hope and comfort. I mean, that's pretty much what religions ought to be offering people. The good news is that human beings don't live forever. And Donald Trump is not going to live forever, nor are his demons going to last. And if they have to go, the demons and Satan himself have to go back into sort of, into the background and kind of wait until the next golden opportunity comes along, well, so be it. But nothing's going to last forever. And if Satan's in the business of occupying human bodies, he's handicapped to some extent by the fact that human beings are mortal. Even though he's immortal and is going to spend immortality and eternity roasting in hell, the people he's working with, the people he decides to use as his vessels on earth, as it were, are not immortal. And on that, I think, somewhat comforting note, I'm going to close this program, and I'm going to invite you to come back again for another episode of the Bizarro Gospel Hour. And until then, this is your pal Bishop Pete saying so long.